Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Francesca Lagerberg has joined me in the studio today. Welcome, Francesca.
We're pleased to be here.
Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing your story today. Our audience is used to, by now, just hearing about our guest in terms of their own words. So please tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am the CEO of a top 10 global accounting firm called Baker Tilly International. So I've been in professional services for a very, very long time. I used to be a bit of a tax person, but now I'm more of a leader person. And I also have the joy of 3 kids, 2 dogs, and a very, very understanding husband.
Excellent. And what breeds are the dogs? I always love hearing about dogs.
One is an English Springer Spaniel and one is a Cocker Spaniel. So they're both working dogs and they're an absolute joy and a total menace in equal measure.
But they will prolong your life.
Apparently so. Or actually, sometimes I think they'll reduce my life, but we'll see.
So again, it's very normal for our guests to explain as you've done there. So when you're not working, I know international roles are very busy roles as well, but when you're not working, how do you down tools? How do you switch off?
I do spend loads of time walking. I love walking with the dogs come into a big play there. I love the cinema. I love theatre. So any kind of drama is very appealing. And I do love spending time with my children. They're all adults now. So if I'm lucky enough for them to spend some time with me, that is a great joy. They all have very busy lives now, but I sneak in there still from time to time.
Well, I'm very lucky. I have a 30-year-old daughter and she's now mother to 2 children. So I've got 2 little grandchildren as well, which
How
is lovely. So spending
lovely.
time with them. So your time will come around that.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So let's go way back. This show is all about how does the earliest experiences that we can remember and into our teens inform our leadership style, and how does that change over time, and what kind of challenges does it present to us? So take us back to the earliest experiences that you can remember that shape your leadership style.
Yes, I've been pondering this because you sent me the questions in advance, which was very kind. And I suppose the biggest thing about my childhood was the position I was in my family. So I am the youngest of 4. And I think there's something intriguing about the 4th child because there often isn't a 4th child. There might well be a 2nd or a 3rd, but 4th is unusual in this day and age. And there was a bit of a gap, and then they had me. So I always thought in our household that everyone had a role, except I never did. So there was a role for the firstborn who happened to also be incredibly clever. So also they took the clever role. There was one boy, so he always had that role in the household. And I had a very glamorous sister. She's still very glamorous. And then there was me. And so I think there was something quite intriguing about being the 4th. Your parents are shattered by that stage. So, it's amazing they can remember your name. And there was not a logical spot for me. And that was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because I think it gave me huge freedom from a young age to not fit into a pre-organized role. But also a disadvantage in that you were never quite sure where you did fit into things. And I think that permeated through into my working career.
Yeah, so tell us a bit more about that, maybe into your teens, because it's quite interesting, that environment that you've described there. What kind of role models did you have outside of that kind of family dynamic that you maybe lean towards?
I think that role modeling was very much predicated at my school, but my family were very big on education, for which I'm extremely grateful. So they were very keen for us to be well educated, and that didn't involve any fancy education. We just went to a good old state school, but they really encouraged us to work hard and do well, and I'm really grateful for that. But that meant that I had quite a strong connection with the school because I was one of those people actually like learning, which I think from a teacher's perspective is kind of like, thank goodness someone actually wants to be here. And I really wanted to be there. I loved loved school, loved everything about it. So there was a huge amount of role modeling that would predicate around the teachers that I spent time with and their encouragement and their interest in helping me do the things that I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but they were really encouraging. And they did extra lessons, they did extra encouragement to do extra qualifications, and they were fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And I really loved every minute of school. And actually, I preferred being at school than being at home, because by the time I was getting into my teenage years, most of my siblings had left home or were about to leave home. So there wasn't really anyone of my age around. So school was a lot of fun.
So let's talk a little bit then, because you said you weren't sure about what to do. What's the earliest age that you can remember having some kind of dream, whatever that might?
But I think in terms of realistic career ambitions, I think that was quite a long way after most people perhaps come up with those. I mean, I wanted to be a writer. That's what I wanted to be. I love creative writing, and I still love it today, but that's what I wanted to be. But isn't the most easy profession to be in. Little bit of competition around there. So I think in terms of a proper job, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And actually, I would say that was true right throughout my 20s. Still, I think I would arguably, it was well into my 40s where I really worked out what I wanted to do. But I got some great opportunities, but I don't think I ever had the I'm going to be this. So it's a touch of the reverse of the Monty Python sketch, really, isn't it? I want to run away from the circus and become an accountant. I ended up being an accountant, but I don't think I ever made a conscious decision that that was the career that was going to be my life. I think it took quite a long time before I realized that it's a very, very cool profession and you can do a lot with it. But it wasn't something that I had this bolt of lightning view. That's the job I want. I think I more fell into it than intentionally focused on it.
Well, let's talk about your 20s then. We all know, listening to this and watching this, how difficult it can be in the accounting profession in terms of the long hours, the pressure, the deadlines. And in your 20s, in particular, sometimes that can be quite challenging. So just talk to us about that, maybe that decade, and what kind of challenge you were facing from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the first bit of my 20s, I was just finishing studying, and I really like studying. So I dragged that on for as long as I possibly could. And so I finished off a law degree, and then I did another law qualification. And then I went traveling for a year, which is quite frankly one of the most enjoyable things I've ever done. So I was postponing any degree of working for as long as possible. And I did a gap year when people didn't really do gap years quite so frequently. And that was an absolute joy, because that meant you were doing something that felt like you were exploring the world in a way that was very different. You had a backpack on, stayed in crazy places. If you liked somewhere, you spent weeks there. If you didn't like it, you left. And that whole year, that whole freedom was just extraordinary and gave me a real passion for traveling, but also just opened my eyes up to the fact that the world I'd grown up in, which was a very, very small part of the Black Country in the West Midlands, there was this big, crazy, extraordinary world out there. And that really changed my whole life experience. I thought, wow, there's all this stuff going on. And then I needed a job, and the accounting world had very kindly offered me one. I think that's probably the only thing that was recruiting in the late 80s when I was going for a job. And I just couldn't believe the difference. I'd gone from this immense educational freedom, this extraordinary gap year traveling, and then I had a proper job. And that involved well, let's be honest, involved 8 till 9, really. It was very long hours. I was studying to be a chartered accountant, which is, grueling in its own way. I was in a very, very rigorous environment. I was in a big four firm, and it was it was like the first half of the 20s and last half of my 20s were very different. And all I knew was I hadn't quite found what was going to be right for me. It was good pay. It was great people. The people around me were amazing, really interesting people, some of them which I'm lucky enough to still be friends with. But I just knew this particular variation on a theme wasn't working for me. And I was looking for what next. I hadn't got a clue what next was. Kind of like some of it, interested in some of it, but it wasn't, I have not had a career that's gone like that. That's just never been the pattern that's worked for me. So I, towards the end of the 20s, I left this big four firm, that security, and that sort of very stretched environment, and went to work, as you do, in a publishing house, which obviously is wonderfully underpaid, but very creative. That creative writing piece coming out again. And I stayed there for 5 years and had the extraordinary advantage of being in effectively, although it was run by a very big organization, you were running that magazine, you were running this publication. It played to some of the accounting things that I'd been doing, but it was also creative writing, and we were lobbying, and we were talking to government, and I took my first steps into public speaking as well. So my 20s was very much this roller coaster ride of fabulous freedom, no freedom at all, and then this new door opening into a very different one.
And it's really interesting because what I'm hearing, obviously, this for the first time with you, Francesca, is that you describe in your family environment in particular, you didn't necessarily know what role, was natural for you within the family. You had the role at school and played to that. And then you obviously went off after studying very hard to have freedom around the world, which you obviously talk very lovingly about. And then back into this, what's my role? Not really sure if this is right for me. And then back into that again. So just talk to us about how you cope with those lows where you've had such the highs and feeling that freedom. How did you actually cope with those difficult moments?
Well, I think during the early days of accounting, you're so focused on passing your exams. You kind of have this sort of relentless tunnel that's taking you forward. And also, although I think it's coming back a bit now, if you didn't pass your exams, you were out. It wasn't, there wasn't much of a safety net. You had to pass. So I think you were so focused on doing that. I think it was a little touch of Dunkirk spirit as well, because you were surrounded by quite a large cadre of people who were going through the same thing. And it was hard work, but we also had a lot of fun. I mean, you were all in your 20s, you were all going through this experience. And that kind of kept me going through. But I think my focus on my career was very secondary to my focus on just passing the exams, getting through this bit, and then seeing what you could do with it. I took a view that I didn't want to be an auditor, which is what I've been brought in to do. I'd gone that route, which is how most people start in accountancy. So I just took every secondment that was on offer. I mean, literally everything. I mean, there was a secondment for a day. Yeah, there, let me do that. So I did a lot of secondments during my time. And again, I'm very grateful to the Big Four organization I was in, because it gave me that ability to do it. And that's what kept me going, because it was changing, it was flexible, it was interesting, but then I'd have to come back and do the thing I needed to do. So I think it was just finding some kind of release within that structure that kept me going, and then taking the decision just to leave it behind and go into something completely hopeless from a career point of view, but delightful and a great, great opportunity.
Well, this is the balance, isn't it? That a lot of people listening to this, it's do I have to have one or the other? Do I have to have something I feel passionate and where I belong and really adding value, and yet I'm not maybe having the earning capacity? Or do I not sell myself but go and have the earning and still not maybe sometimes very happy or feeling I'm adding value? So it's a very, very common thing that I come across. So talk to us then about the next decade or so and the pace that you want to, because I'm guessing it's going to be quite interesting with family coming along as well. So yeah, just talk to us about what happened then.
Well, I joined this publishing house, and we were running a weekly magazine. A weekly magazine has a real cadence to it. You have press day, you have days when you've got to get certain things done, you have quiet times, you have very busy times. But because it was a small magazine and this big organization, we did everything. So we were running the business, or it felt like we were running the business. We're very close to the people doing the advertising. We were choosing the pictures. We were laying the actual publication down ourselves. It happens in a slightly different way today. So you effectively began to get this sort of sense of entrepreneurial business. This is how a business works, and you got exposed to different elements of real life in a business. You have to keep your readership up. You have to sell your advertising. It was very commercial, alongside the technical stuff that we were doing. But yes, at that stage, I did have my first child as well. So that craziness where your whole world just gets chucked out the window. Anything and if everyone's ever told you about being a parent is just not true. And well, not true for you. And
Right.
so I had my first child, and then in quite short succession, I had my second child whilst there. And then a couple of years later, we decided to go big and have a third. But yeah, the 30s were very much parenting time. And I think some people are much more able than I was, but it was just relentless because you're trying to work, trying to make sure you're being a decent parent, trying to manage all of it. And we used to call it a UPS marriage. You know, it was a logistics exercise. We'd sit down at the beginning of the week. Who's going to do what? Who's available? Who can do this? Who can do that? What about this thing? What about crazy book week right in the middle of the week? Have we got any costumes? Of course we haven't. How are we going to manage this madness? And we sort of got through it by I don't know, by the skin of our teeth, I think. It all felt very, very crazy. But also because I was trying to stay working. I really wanted to keep working. I didn't want to stop. We needed to work. It was important for us both to work financially, but just from a mental perspective, we both wanted to work. So I was doing the world's most stupid hours. So I would get back, I didn't sleep much. So I'd get up early with the kids. I'd sort out them, getting them where they needed to go. I'd go to work. I'd finish early. I'd pick them up and then people would take over. And then I would start working again at 9 o'clock in the evening. I'd work from 9 till 1 to get my job done. So it was actually hybrid working back in the 90s and early 2000s. It really had a very understanding employer, which was brilliant. They didn't really care when I worked, as long as I did the hours and I managed it. But it was, looking back on it, completely mad. So I have absolutely no sleep rhythm these days, which means I can sleep anywhere at any time, which when you travel a lot is just a gift, an absolute gift. So I don't get jet lag. I don't I could lie on the floor now and have a little kip, it'd be fine. So I have a very strange sleep rhythm born out of years of madness. But I think looking back on it now, you go, well, that was just a bit crazy. Surely we could have put something around that to make that a little bit more doable. But you don't. You just plow on through, get it done. But a very driving factor for me was I knew I wanted to keep my career going. And I knew that when my kids were that little bit older, I want to go back into a slightly more serious career. And sure enough, once my kids hit school age, I was able to rotate out of the job I was in and went back into the profession. And I've stayed in the profession ever since.
Yeah, and was that planned in that sense, or was it fortuitous? It's interesting how these things happen when the kids, are at a certain age. What happened with that transition?
Just totally fortuitous, really. My whole career is just a bunch of lucky streaks. That I often feel when people ask me, "How did you get where you got to?" They go, "Well, I was just really lucky." I got approached, I got headhunted to do a job. I'd been in this publishing role. I'd been gun to do quite a bit of public speaking, and I was terrible. And then I taught myself how to be good, and I was got great input from people about how to be better. So I loved the whole lecturing thing, and I'd begun to create a side career alongside my publishing career because hey, I didn't have enough to do. So I was doing that and doing this speaking. So I was going around the country speaking on tax. Yeah, that exciting. But amazingly, people quite like to hear about it. So I was talking to accountants, but giving them technical updates. And I just loved it. Absolutely loved it. Amazing people I got to spend time with. But with all of that, I got approached by someone to see if I'd like to come back into a more traditional role. I actually went to work at the ICAW, which was one of the big institutes in the UK, and I was involved in their tax faculty. And then I got headhunted again to go back into the profession properly, which was to go and work at another mid-tier firm. But I had, I suppose, unintentionally, at least made myself quite public. I have the gift of a very unusual name. People kind of hear it and go, "That's mad. What is that?" Italian first name, Swedish second name. She comes from Dudley. What is that about? People keep that and they remember you. Then hopefully you've given them something in the lecturing or the writing that you've done. So I got a brand. I got a tiny, tiny, tiny kind of Z-list publicity level, which meant that at least when I went for some of these jobs, I wasn't completely unknown. So I think I got opportunities I wouldn't have got without that very, very tiny but slightly public profile.
Now, what's really interesting about what you've told us so far, particularly the publishing company and then back into the profession, it sounds still 100 miles an hour. Obviously, you're traveling all over. You've still got the family. So, just talk to us a little bit about what you were learning at that time. It's all very well with hindsight now, but what you were learning at that time in terms of the teams that you were leading, and bear in mind that you were very busy as well. What were the learning points for you then in terms of the way that you led those teams?
Goodness. because I really wasn't running much of teams. I was, it was individuals I was working with. It was a small number of people. I think I was actually pretty rubbish, actually. I think I was just so busy trying to get things done. I think it took me a good period of time to appreciate that there's a whole wonderful, amazing culture behind how you run a team. And there's a real art that luckily a lot of it's learnable. Some people are amazing, they're just good at it. But I think that's unusual. And I didn't really spend a huge amount of time thinking about it. We just got on and we got the job done. I think it was only in slightly later years when I went into different roles and was managing bigger teams, I realized I needed to get better at doing it. But also, I had the absolute privilege of doing a coaching course and then realizing, oh, there's another way of doing this. More about that curiosity, more about ask, don't tell, more about listen better. And that for me was game changing because suddenly I could see there was this much better way of leading that I'd wasn't sure I'd done before. And you just got much better results. It was much more impactful. So as I came into latter sort of my coming back into the profession years, I suddenly realized there was just a much better way of doing this. And all that stuff that had been helpful up to that stage, there was this whole other world that I hadn't even begun to look at. And as soon as you start having a lot of direct reports, you've got to get your act together. And I think that was a wake up call for me. I just went, I really need to invest time in this. I need to think about how this works, and I need to spend more time learning about how to make this work and listening to people I have reporting to me to see if it's actually delivering for them. So that was a really important piece, and that's still an ongoing thing. I mean, it hasn't stopped. You never stop learning about that, and you learn something every day that helps you become slightly better at what you do.
And what you're talking about there is very common, again, in a lot of leaders that are operating in that way you describe. And yet it's very difficult for them to slow down when they've been 100 miles an hour for most of their career. Sometimes it takes a jolt, like a health scare, or, usually a superior or boss actually telling them, no, you need to create spaces. So how did you work on that, bearing in mind the way that you'd been? It's all very well easy that I need to create space and time to think about these things, but how did you practically do that?
Well, I think there was a couple of things really. I think it was unsustainable to work the way that I'd been working. I was working crazy hours. I'd have to be fair, my employers weren't expecting me to work crazy hours. That was self-imposed. I thought that was what you did. You kind of had to work twice as hard as everybody around you. And that was in a very male environment where you actually did have gender disparity in pay. You didn't always get the same opportunities. You weren't always the one who was going to get the promotion. So you almost had to be better than everybody to get those opportunities. And whether that was true or not, that's how I felt. So I think there was just a recognition that you just can't keep doing that. I mean, that's madness. And also my kids were getting older and they needed a different kind of care. It wasn't like just the nappy changing and the feeding, and they needed you to be present when you were there in a way that was even more marked than earlier on. And I just thought I got the whole balance completely wrong. I thought everything was 100 miles an hour. Everything was helter skelter. Everything was crazy. So I think that was the wake up call for me. But also, you just can't do the job like that on an ongoing basis. I think you either do, it's very sad to see people completely burn out, or you just leave. You just go, this is too mad. And an awful lot of my friends, an awful lot of my colleagues just left. The women, they just left. They said, this is too much. It's too crazy. We've had a discussion at home. I've decided I'm going to step back. And I so didn't want to do that, but I really understand why they did. It was very, very difficult to manage all the things that they were managing, and a lot dropped out, and very few of them ever came back into the profession. They maybe came back and did other things, and many of them had amazing and fruitful lives. But their choice was to walk away. My choice was to try and find a way to make it work.
So let's talk a little bit now about remote working, because I'm only guessing here and assuming, but you've obviously held international leadership roles where people aren't in the same country as you sometimes. So bear in mind this is commonplace now, but prior to COVID, it was less common. What have been the learning points for you there in terms of managing those remote teams?
I love remote working. It's like the best thing ever. Why wouldn't you want a remote? I'm at home now, obviously. I mean, who thinks going back to work full time unless you're building a car? It makes sense. I just find it unfathomable. I think presenteeism is a way of just showing you don't trust your people in environments where you are able to work from home. I appreciate not everybody is. I have been very fortunate in that I have remote worked pretty much all my career. So when I was working in publishing, I'd do stuff at home in the evening. When I was in other firms, there was an ability to do some things at home. Varied in the roles, but some things at home. And then when I was back into sort of really full scale into accounting, I had a smallish team. We were running a technical department, so we weren't client facing. And that made this a lot easier. And I just said, let's all remote work. What we'll do is that every day, every week, everyone will work from home at least one day a week. We can probably do two, maybe even three, but we all will work one day a week from home. Everybody. No one can't, even the secretary. Everybody has to do it, because then there's none of this, oh, they're getting the special treatment. And it was just absolutely life-changing. So there was people who was the squeezed middle. They had elderly parents, they had young children, they could do different things. People could take up different hobbies. People got dogs, always a good thing. It just changed the way we worked, and we were so much more productive. Our productivity massively increased. People were happier. People were giving more. The discretionary spend that people gave just completely changed. And we just trust people to do their job. You know, it was in an environment where there was quite a lot of, oh, they'll just be at home drinking coffee and doing their washing. Well, they probably are having coffee, but you're doing that in the office. They'll probably put the washing on. That takes about 3 minutes. Just that belief and trust. And I do find it very sad that organizations that perhaps are able to do hybrid working in a more effective way are taking a view that actually having to be in the office all the time is the way to go. I do get the community. I get the sense of trying to get face-to-face time, which is a joy. But I work with a team that are all over the world, and we do come together at limited times in the year. And that gives us the energy that when we're on these sorts of calls, we can talk to each other with knowledge and understanding. But when we're together, we try and make sure we do quite a few things that are very social. So we actually try to get to know each other rather than just work. I love face to face. It's a big joy to spend time with people or to have that. But do you have to be in the office 5 days a week to do it? No, of course you don't. Unless you're in a business where it's essential for dealing with the clients and customers that you have. But I do think it's when I was working at a big four firm, which was in the days where you did have to be in 5 days a week. I mean, hybrid working, flexible working was a myth. No one had any people. There'd only been whispers about it. We used to take our jackets off. It was also quite smart dressing. So always wore a jacket, and we'd leave them on the back of the chairs, so it looked as though we were still around, even though we'd gone out for a long lunch or we'd gone home at a normal time. And then you'd sort of get back the next day and you'd take that jacket off the chair, have your other jacket on. So, and you just felt, what is that? These were people, I was surrounded by people who got 1 degrees, and we were all running around putting jackets on chairs. What is that? Madness. So I hope some sanity prevails around finding a decent balance within that. And I know, talking to a lot of people who are looking to join organizations, they want to have that freedom to work where it makes sense to work, to have a community, to have a great place to go, but also not be frog marched into sitting at a chair from 9 till 5 if that isn't the most productive way to do your job.
Great. I've got a question linked to this, and I'm not saying this is us, but I have experienced this in professional service firms in particular, where there's a lot of change happening because of AI, and will continue to do so.
Yeah.
What's your view now? We've got 5 generations in organizations, and your organization is going to be no different to that.
Yeah.
Where my generation, so I'm talking 50s now and even into 60s, there's definitely resentment building up in senior leadership in some organizations, where they're seeing the youngest generation coming through and demanding a different way of being. And it's not the same as us having to do all those hard yards in terms of the work and all the hours. What's your view on that, and what can we learn from the youngest generation?
Wow. I mean, God love the young people, really. I mean, it was mad. It was completely mad. Get a really intelligent person, put them in a job, any innovation and creativity out of them, and then 3 years later on say, oh, be creative, be a great leader. It was just bonkers. It made no sense at all. Do you have to do, I'm of a tax background, do you have to do 300 tax returns to be good at doing a tax return? Would you maybe need to do 10 or 30, or kind of understand them enough? Of course, it's the latter. It's not the former. So I think there is a sort of reality check about actually, could you just be smarter? So could you use simulation to learn some things you need to learn? If AI, I mean, I'm excited about AI. I think it's fantastic. If that could take away some of the very dull jobs that I had to do when I was learning, if that can do that and do it better and more sophisticated and quicker and with fewer mistakes, then where do you bring the value? Where's the humanity bit? How do you simulate that learning so you can teach people coming in how to do this in a safe environment, how to learn, how to get better, how to ask great questions, and then they don't need to do those 300 returns or 67 audits or go and count timber in a timber yard. Done that. How can you teach them to do the skills they definitely need, but you don't need to absolutely sort of waterboard them with them. I think you've just got to have a more sensible approach. I think the demand of people coming in is really good because it makes us think. Because why should we be training people today? How we were trained. I'm in your category. I'm in that 50, 60 kind of vibe. Why would I want someone to be trained like I was trained 30 years ago? There's literally nothing I do in my life that is the same as it was 30 years ago. Pretty much nothing. So why would it be this different for our profession? And I think it's short-term thinking. I think if you wonder why people don't want to join accountancy, why the numbers are getting more difficult, why it's seen as less exciting opportunity, it's thinking like that. We have to show, because it's a fabulous profession, we have to show that there are amazing things. You're going to be dealing with people who've got interesting problems that you can help solve, but you're not going to do that just by training them exactly the same way that we were trained. I think you talk to some of the institutes like the ICAW, they're really thinking ahead. They're looking at better ways of learning. And I think that's important for all of us. There's very little to get excited about the sort of training that we had, and an awful lot to get excited about the training that we ended up doing. Why waste all those years? And why would a very smart person want to waste those years doing it? So I hope that we get to a better place and AI becomes an absolute that tool. But oh my goodness, I've got 20. My kids are all in their 20s. The things they ask, the things they want, the things they're looking for, I go, oh, that's so much smarter than I was when I was 20. I wish I'd had the courage to think about those sorts of things.
I've got one final question for you, Francesca, before we finish today. I want to go back to what we talked about right at the start about dreams. And you and I are both at a stage in our lives now where we have more choices than we used to. The kids are growing up. Obviously, they're never completely off the wage bill, but we've got choices. So a question for you now. Let's say that in the next 2 years, you had even more choice in terms of the situation came to you where you could do anything that you wanted because, financial freedom was there for you. What would you choose to do? What's the dream for you and how you'd want to live your life?
Well, I definitely would look for something that still involved my brain working. I'd get a real buzz out of that, but having a bit more freedom of time. That time's such a gift, isn't it? I adore travel. So I'm lucky enough to travel with my job, but to travel to those places that you aren't going to go to for your job. I like adventurous travel. I like traveling to places that are a long way off the beaten track. So I definitely do that. I spend a lot of time with my dogs, obviously. But also it is an opportunity, I think, to just keep learning. Because why wouldn't you want to go and learn something that is completely irrelevant to your career, but is just a joy to do? And as I mentioned earlier, I love writing. So I'd love to do some more work around just improving creative writing skill.
Apparently everyone's got a book in them, so
yeah, my book would be quite dull. But
could be a fiction. Could be a fiction. You never know.
Yeah. But I think there's a joy in doing something that's creative. I'd love to have more time to do that.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Francesca, I really enjoyed listening to your story today. The roller coaster, the ups and downs, but also the choices that you've made in life. And bearing in mind that you couldn't find that role in your family, it becomes very clear to me that obviously your family know where their place is in terms of your roles, obviously behind the dogs, as it is with me as well.
Yeah,
but
priorities.
Exactly.
Priorities.
Yeah, exactly. But once again, thanks for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, Andrew. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favourite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.